Hey guys, I'm Taylor.
And I'm Erica.
And we're your hosts for Finding the Family. Finding the Family was created as a way to help you figure out how to disciple at home because that's not easy. And so we brought in ministry leaders and professionals and created conversations for us to learn how to find our family identity in Christ. And this week we have a special episode for you. We have a Zoom with Steve and Twyla Lee all the way from Colorado who have some great information on why it's harder to reach those who are closest to you. So stay tuned. All right. Well, Steve and Twyla Lee, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
You bet.
Yeah. So you guys are out in Colorado. You've done a lot of ministry in your careers, relational ministry, family ministries. You were at HU, St. Francis, all around. So tell us a little bit about what you guys kind of do now.
Well, we were at Huntington teaching a variety of schools. I was at HU at Huntington University for 24 years, chair of the psychology department. And Twyla, you were...
My background is in social work. And so I was teaching, I had done some practice before we moved to Indiana, but when we got there, I got a job for the first time teaching full-time at St. Francis University. I was there for 7 years and then directed the social work program at Taylor for 11 years. And then was invited to come to Huntington University and start a social work program there. So I did that and I was there for 6 years before we moved to Colorado. But Steve and I mean, God has really led us in our own marriage by opening doors for us to get involved in that when we were just newly married, and there was a lot we didn't know.
Right.
And just before we became parents, we got involved in training for marriage enrichment. And so together we've been leading marriage seminars and family life conferences for like 35 years now in various parts of the country, kind of on the side. And after we retired, we did a little bit more of that. And so that's kind of our focus, is working with churches and with universities to encourage marriage and family and parenting within those systems.
Yeah. And so one of the cool things that, and one of the reasons I wanted to have you guys on was because of your experience within working with families and hearing the complexity of discipleship. And that's kind of the focus of today's episode is really, there's a discipleship model that's laid out in scripture. Like, we should be disciples at home. I think one of the most unique challenges, Eric and I have been talking about this for a while, is that for whatever reason, and maybe it's just us, but the people closest to you are the hardest to reach. And so why do you guys think that would be, that even your family, your friends, the people closest to you, why is it so hard to reach them?
Because they know you. They know
Yes.
your ups, your downs, your faults, and Jesus even said that. He says, it's tough for a prophet to be heard in his own country or in his own town.
Yeah.
It's when you are known by people, they have impressions of you. You guys probably know and remember that when we were kids growing up, it takes a long time before you see parents as people. They just kind of are parents. And, eventually when you grow up and you get to be an adult, you look and say, oh yeah, I guess they were real people too, that had hopes and dreams and insecurities and problems and faults. You don't see them that way as you're growing up. And that's true with a lot of situations, that people are seen by how you know them or the role they play in your life. And so to try to bring something to them that may be important to you, but if they haven't seen that before or haven't heard about it before, it's a tough time kind of putting that together.
Yeah.
No.
We talked about that a little bit. So right now we have a 3 and a 1-year-old. So discipling within our own home hasn't been too challenging yet.
Right.
It's more so those family members, right, who are maybe somebody who was a figure, like a mother or a father, an aunt, uncle, whatever it may be. It's almost like, when those people are placed on your heart and you feel like those are the ones you want to reach, there's almost a hesitance because of exactly what you said. They know who you are. They've seen our faults. So that's kind of been our struggle. But and also the respecting your elder kind of thing. We kind of were talking like, do they feel insulted by us bringing something like this to them? So it's been kind of tough navigating that for us.
So reaching your kids is one thing. Like, and the Shema talks through that. It says you should teach your kids at home. You should write this on your doorpost, to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, your soul, and your might.
Right. That's
something that's in the Titus 2 biblical model. This is an older generation pouring into a younger generation. Mm-hmm. But I think one of those challenges we face is, what about our friends, or what about the people, the generations before us, who are still seeking Christ too? They need the message just as much, and we have sometimes just as much time with them. So, so there is that barrier of how to share the gospel with them sometimes.
Sure. And one of the things with those that are older is they often look and see you in the role of being either their child or their nephew or niece or whatever it might be. And that I've lived more life than you. So who are you to
exactly
about such and such? And it actually kind of brings one thing that I think we'd both want to share, and that when you want to share with people, even Jesus at times was very good at not simply telling people what they need to know. He was great at asking questions. And one of the things you can do when you're younger with those that are older is to ask them questions about their own journey, about their own faith. Have you ever thought about this? Rather than coming across as someone where I've got information that you need to know.
Yeah, that was what we talked about, is like, how do you say, like, hey, this is something I think you need to know, because from their perspective, well, you shouldn't know something as a younger generation that I don't already know. And I think, just that's a big thing that we always try to focus on, is that when you do sit down and talk with someone, I think it's really important to get their story. And to ask, why are you here, and what brought you to this place? I want to know all about it, because the reality is I was there as well. Like, I'm not different from you, yet what Christ has done in me is to renew me and give me a new life. And it's there for you too. I think that's a very great point. And I think back to even the whole identity thing, like, to be known is sometimes the most beautiful and the most scary thing I think that we experience as humans, is all the developmental cycle of life, from a 2-year-old trying to, be known as a princess to mom and dad, to a 13-year-old who wants to be known by their peers, to an adult who wants to be known as an adult.
Right.
And I think when there's like this exposing of, you get to know my personality type, my habits, and my behaviors, who I was before Christ. I think that's what, almost, though there's a lot of relatability, there ends up being a barrier to say, well, you were this. And that's where in the Shema that really resonates with me. If you read on in Deuteronomy 6, it talks about when you write these things on your doorposts. To me, that's, how is it evident to other people, like, this is a believer? So how am I seeing this within you? So is the way that I'm conducting my own life and sharing my faith conducive of what Christ would really honor?
Right. Yeah. And even when you look at the Shema in Deuteronomy 6, you've got not only how you live your life, but that sharing your faith becomes a matter of not sitting people down for a lecture, but it is, as you walk along the way, as you rise up, as you lay down, it's in the normal conversations, normal flow of how you talk about things in life. And whether that's with relatives or others, friends that you have that are older, or your own kids as they're growing up, you can talk about, something in nature and say, look what God has done. And, there are a lot of ways that you can make it a natural part of conversation rather than a pulpit sermon to somebody.
Right. And that, I think that's like part of when he says, like, to love the Lord your God, part of loving someone is to know someone.
Yes.
So
Right.
again, like you have to learn and to know and to spend time in a relationship with, just like to love my wife, I need to know her and to be in a relationship with her. And if I didn't know her, how could I ever genuinely love her? And also it's not just by reading and studying, it's by spending time in a relationship and to live with her to really know who she is.
Very, very true. Very true.
We have always said that it's so important within family relationships, and of course this applies elsewhere, but to begin there is to have a genuine curiosity about that other person. If they feel that you really care, that when you ask a question and then you really listen and you follow up with that and you're really curious, you want to know more. It's amazing, I think, how little we know about our family and we think we know so much. So the assumptions we make are barriers to us learning more. I mean,
absolutely.
We just recently lost Steve's brother, and there's a whole background story of difficulty there. But in going through his things, we're finding out things about him that we wish we had known earlier. And we think about, are there ways that we could have engaged with him more? What, just to review that to help us. Okay, so how do we relate to the brothers and sisters that we have left? How can we have better relationships than we've had? And I think that's that genuine curiosity. I'm finding that to be true with teenage grandchildren right now. I've had a good relationship as a grandma, and now with one of my granddaughters moving far away, I've just been praying about how do I keep a connection. And a spontaneous moment came up between she and I where I suggested we would write to each other. And this generation doesn't write letters, right?
No.
And she grabbed onto it and she goes, yes, if you write me, Grandma, I'll write you back. And I thought, okay. And I said, ask me questions, so that we can write about things. And I'm hoping that, so it's that genuine curiosity about family members at all different ages that helps open doors, I think, that we don't even imagine might be there until we engage in that way.
So I think that's really interesting that you brought that up, because we were just talking. We recently had my grandmother over to our house, and she brought a file folder, and it was essentially like a family ancestry. And I've never known, and now I am super curious about where I'm from versus where I thought I was from. And I'll never forget her mother, my great grandmother, before she had passed. This was probably 2 years before she had passed. We were on the phone. I was out in San Diego, making my phone calls back to family. And somehow she had said, well, you don't even know my maiden name. And I was like, I don't. I said, Grandma, tell me about you. And I got this whole story about how she was orphaned during the Depression because her family couldn't provide for her. They didn't have money to take care of her. And then come to find out, like, she had a different last name than everyone else. And all of these things, I was like, how did I love you so much and then never know this about you? But then when I found this out about you, I love you even more.
Yeah.
And so it was cool. And we were talking about that lineage of our family, and she brought this over. So from my great grandmother, 10 generations back was when they first came to America. It started in the 1600s, but they were in America in the 1700s at some point. But I was looking at this list and I'm like, that's my family.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I've never known about this side. But what we were talking about was, look at where we will be 10 generations from now. Would the legacy that we leave with Christ, would that be remembered from us? Because I couldn't tell you, honestly, I don't know. I could make assumptions but I don't know about where they were in their faith. If they were Catholic, if they were, Protestant from a Reformation, I don't know any of that. But really the stewardship that we have of the times right now with the people that are around us and the family that we have was really like this. Look how many people it took to make me. Look how many people came along my path in my life that I never even knew about. And here I am in my faith. And I just would love to leave that legacy. Like if kids were to look back through generations and be like, well, this is where grandma and grandpa started. And now we're here because of what they've done, what Christ has done through them, really. And I just think there's something that was so inquisitive in me that night that I still like. One of our relatives is supposedly, I don't know if he's a Spaniard or something. I'm like, there's no way in my blood that exists. but I was so excited because it was so new. And it was like, once it was revealed to me, it was just like, I need to know more of that. And like what you're saying is the same way. Like when you want to know more about someone with that passion, that desire, other people feel that.
Yes.
And then like, I think it's cool because then you make like your granddaughter, you make that connection. It's a very intimate thing to write notes to one another. It's like a lost art of intimacy that, that I think is just, it's simple, but really it's just intentional too.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. It's all about being intentional. Kind of like Steve said, you have these relationships where you don't see a parent as a person until later on. I think the same thing goes for grandparents, and you have to be almost tender and gentle with people, and like you said, like ask them questions, get to know their story, because that's what opens people up, and then you just learn so much. And kind of like we were talking earlier about your ancestors and everything, it makes you realize that if we want to leave a legacy, we have to start now, because there is an urgency, and we don't know how long we have. So, starting now is something that we've realized is so important, because we don't want to miss our call, as being disciples.
Right. Yeah. And I'll tell you, we've talked about this. When you get to the point where you're going to retire, you look back and say, where did all the years go? I mean, mentally, I feel like I'm like 25 or 30 and ready to start.
That's awesome.
So, you have that sense of you don't know how long you have. And certainly our connection with Life Church, there have been a number of people at Life Church where you just want to say gone too soon. And you don't know what that legacy is going to be and how much time you have for it. And so looking at how do I make my faith important enough to me that not only do I live it, but I think about it. And as I interact with people, it's something that I want to share with them, but I don't need to share it in a way that I'm trying to dump on them. Yes. I need to do it in relationship.
Yeah.
And
do you think that's one of the barriers then, Steve? Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, do you think that's one of the barriers? Because there's clearly a barrier in today's culture of how to evangelize, whether that be we're too nervous of how the approach is, or we've never done it before. Why do you think it is that it's so hard for someone who's never maybe evangelized at all, or who's tried evangelizing, has been shut down? What makes it so difficult to take that step?
I think that there are a lack of role models. They haven't seen that demonstrated in their own lives. And how are you going to do something you've never learned how to do? So I think really helps, even within the church family, to have, we used to, growing up many years ago, we had testimonials where people in the church would get up and tell their story and their faith journey and who was influential in their lives. I can still mention Mrs. Hofer, who, when I walked forward during an evangelistic crusade, she took me aside and for the first time showed me through scripture how I could be assured of my salvation. I grew up in a Christian family, but I always had these doubts. Could I lose it? And that was a pivotal moment in my life. So to have stories about people and who influenced them in their spiritual journey, it's storytelling, but and I think people would be much more at ease about telling their story than thinking they have to preach,
Right.
Yeah, or getting it wrong.
Anyway, so just equipping people to see how others do it in such a natural way, asking questions so that it's something they can see themselves being able to do. I think
really
we
good.
taught, and that evangelism, ways to evangelize are diverse. How did people get reached for Christ? Oh my, the stories show all kinds of different avenues. But if we don't hear the stories, we don't know that.
And Christ reached people in different ways. And I think one of the obstacles, similar to what Twyla's saying, is you've got people out there who think they need to learn a certain way to do it, and they have to learn exactly what to say and how to go about it, and that's just not really the case. And so learning that sharing your story, I mean, when you look at the research, one of the things that's out there is the number one thing that turns off non-Christians when they talk to Christians is that they feel as if they're being judged. That somehow that, I'm not good enough. You're telling me I've got to do this, and that if I don't, this is what's going to happen. And while there certainly may be truth in that, it does have to do with how you approach people. And how you approach people is to be a model, to talk about your own story, to ask questions, rather than sort of this hitting people over the head saying, you're missing out, you need to do this or else this. Because we've got to get away from that sense of them feeling judged all the time.
Yeah, I think that's where, go ahead, Twyla.
Another thing that's important is if you're talking with someone and they ask you a hard question and you don't know the answer, to just say, I'm not sure, but I'm going to go find out.
That is exactly what I was going to say. Is I think that's another point, is we think that we have to have all the answers, because sometimes people do come to you with really difficult questions, and it's okay to say, you know what, I'm not really sure about that. Let's figure it out together, or, let me get back to you on this. And then, having somebody else who you can ask and figure that answer out for you and with you.
Yeah. That's, I think, like one of the things we see in young adults, at least our generations around us, is that, they grew up in Christian homes, but then once they went out on their own, they don't know anything. And so because they don't know anything, their barrier is, I don't even know where to start. I don't know how to do it. And we say, well, just share your story. But I think they haven't even spent time, like maybe searching for what their story is. And I encourage them, like I always, that's why when I meet with them or when I talk with people, I'm like, no, tell me about you. Because if I were to tell you all of my story, if we had enough time, you would, the more I dive into like the depths of how lost I was before I found Christ, I think it's so much more relatable, but people are almost afraid to open up to that level. And I had a meeting with a gentleman probably a month or two ago now. And he was just recently baptized. So it's kind of following up and checking in on him and seeing, how things were going. And I said, tell me a little bit more about your story, because on Baptism Sunday, we record like a roughly 2-minute video. It's like, give us your testimony. They share a lot more, but we had 41 baptisms actually in 2022. So 2-minute video. And I'm like, but I need to know who you are outside of that 2 minutes. He told me some more stuff. And then I said, well, let me tell you a little bit about me. And as I told him, he goes, can I stop you really quick? I said, yeah, what's going on? And he was like, I probably didn't tell you everything that I could have. He was like, he literally told me, he's like, I was fearful if I told you, you would think different about me. I said, well, let me tell you a little bit more about me then. And he was like, I didn't know it worked like that.
Yeah.
And
like, you know what, Taylor, you're hitting on a great point, because we know that for people to truly share at depths that are meaningful or personal, they need to be vulnerable. It means they don't want to be hurt by what they tell people. And one of the best ways to create an openness to being vulnerable in other people is for you to be vulnerable yourself.
Yeah,
and absolutely. That's really what you're saying, is that by you opening up and sharing, it made him or gave him permission to be more free to share from his story as well.
Right. And that's like part of the, not saying I did that the right way, but like the modeling thing that we've talked about is that what our kids see or what other people see in us, like, are we modeling it? And sometimes if they don't know where to start, like, you can be the example to show them, like, well, let me show you. Don't be afraid to go show them to someone else. Like, this is how I have meetings. This is how I host groups. And this is how we reach lost people. Like, come along with me and watch me. It's the same thing your kids do when they pick up behaviors. Like, they watch you and they take the good, the bad, and the ugly from the way you react. And so I think it's the same thing. And I think that's why it's so interesting to me that scripture says it over and over and over. Like, you invest in these people, you live by this example, you do these things, and people will learn from you, and you can raise that generation that way. And I think sadly, like, it's kind of where we've gotten though in culture is we've had a whole generation of, well, I just don't know where to start. And so it's setting up another generation for, well, we won't know where to start.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, and I don't know if this connects with what you're saying or not. But what came to mind is we've got a generation that has been taught primarily through social media that you present a picture of yourself the way that you think you want everybody to see you, which may not reflect at all the way that your life is.
oh,
But that disconnect between here's who I try to show people that I am versus here's who I know that I am makes it tough to define their own story and who they are.
yeah. And that is actually a good point. When we first came to our faith, one of the first things I did was I went to my social media and I deleted all the bad things. Because I thought, like, well, what if someone at the church looks me up? They're going to be like, who is this terrible kid? Like,
Yeah.
I really feared that image. And I look back now and I wish there was a way to recover all of the ugly and put it back on there. All of the posts, all of the pictures, everything. Because it's almost like if I could just give you like a file and say, hey, look at this is who I was.
Right.
And then you can watch the moment where it shifts. Like that's the moment I want to talk about. And I mean, I've done that with even pictures on my phone. In my past, I was so nervous about someone finding out who I was. And then I realized that was actually the easiest way to share with someone else. Like, this is who I was. Like when people share their testimony for baptism, we had a guy who said that, in his testimony video, we didn't show it out front because of the timing, but he mentioned, he was like, I was addicted to pornography, and he paused and he was like, I don't know if I should have said that. Can you edit it out? And I was like, why do you want to edit that out? He was scared. He was nervous. He was like, well, I don't want people to think I looked at pornography. I was like, well, you're not doing it anymore, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, no. I was like, that's the beauty in what Christ has done and redeemed you.
Yep.
Like that needs to be highlighted. Now, obviously for some people that's embarrassing, but I think that's the vulnerability though, to tell someone else that, because that's like a word we don't use anymore.
Right.
We don't talk about that.
And it's important. And I think the thing that we found really interesting, and there's lots of studies that show it too, is people, when they look at people that they think are perfect, they actually don't feel as close to them as when they look at people that they know have problems.
Oh, wow.
Because
such a good point.
Yeah. And so, even pastors who share from the front, or, youth leaders, or whoever it might be, saying, look, I'm a person who's got ups and downs and good and bad, but here's what Christ has done in my life.
Mm-hmm.
You're really setting the stage for people to listen to that better than if you're constantly having to try to present a picture that says, I've got it all together. I never have any problems. I've got a handle on everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
People don't connect to that because that's not their life.
Yeah. And I mean, even your preaching language, like if you just present, I'm giving you this message from the front and these things are working in my life because I spend time doing them and they're super effective. And all you have to do is try these things and you'll have this great life.
Right.
And people look at that and they're like, you don't know what's happening in my home this morning before we came here. Yep. And so that's why it's like, I've learned, Mike and I have talked about that a lot. It's like, how do you have the vulnerability of like, this is who I was, and this is a raw story about my life.
Yeah.
And because of Christ, this is where I am today.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that's the relatability. That's the, relationships are built on trust. And I think people are more inclined to trust someone who is more like them. And I mean, I've even met with people who are addicted to drugs that I hung out with in high school, and they're embarrassed of where they're at today. Like one of my friends, he's overdosed, I think 8 times now. And so he kind of hid himself. And I was like, we bleed the same blood, do we not? Like, what was the difference between you and I when I just happened to get out of Huntington and you were stuck in Huntington? And when I mentioned those things, he starts to really think like, I was like, dude, this is all for you too.
Yeah.
I would not have found it if I had not gotten away. I probably would have been stuck as well.
Yeah.
But then like by the grace of God, I found God in the military, which was just divine in and of itself. So, but then Erica.
I was going to say, kind of going back, it just makes me think a little bit about the social media aspect of, especially kids, who have social media as young as, I don't know, 10, maybe even younger, up until, the teenage years. Those are those times where it's so like you're already, whether you have social media or not, you're already struggling to find yourself and who you are. You have a lot of things, school and, family and friends, all these things that can be difficult for them to navigate. And if you're constantly trying to put on that perfect image, you're never going to be content. There's never, you're always going to be striving for something that's not there, that's not real.
Yeah,
and
so it's good. It's social media can be good. It's a tool. I like that whole point that Steve makes about how if it's the church looks perfect on social media,
right?
But an influencer is more relatable,
Yeah.
And so again, it's like there's good and bad in it. But so what image do we project then for someone to be like, okay, they understand that I'm not perfect. So if I go there, or if I'm a part of this community, they'll understand that I have baggage.
Right. And just like at the end of the day, when you redirect your focus on Jesus and you truly find your identity in him, it's the most beautiful thing because all of that washes away. So we talked about this several times, but I kind of go back and forth with social media because it over time kind of, makes you see all these posts and all these things and like, oh, maybe I should have this or maybe I should be doing that. And
the perfect house with the perfect faith
right, exactly. And when I delete that app and I redirect my focus, which is usually what has to happen, is that I have to go to Jesus because I'm like, this is all false. This is not me. This is, and just go to him and truly be in relationship, not just have that we talk about that so much, not just saying I'm a Christian, but really knowing and seeking Jesus. And then you just, absolutely.
Well, I think it's the other thing that's cool that like when Jenny or like Nick, when they post stories on the church's page, it's so cool to watch the people that are friends with the person whose story it is, for them to be like, wow, thanks for sharing that. Or when they're on the podcast and they're like, I had no clue that ever happened in your life. And you're like,
or even the relatability,
and that's the church. It's the believers. It's the people. And when you highlight the imperfect people saved by a perfect savior, that is relatable.
Right.
And that's the beauty of how we could use it for good. Yet like the nature of sin in us is to say that like, there's things that captivate us and torment us to make us believe, here's your perfect reality. It's this glass house. And it's not attainable, but it's such a big call for us though. And in our generations, Mary Clark actually has told us this before, that our generation has it harder raising kids because of the effects of culture around us and how expedited some of that information is.
And let me jump in and just say, and maybe in a sense ask you this question too now, because Erica, when you were talking about it, totally agree that social media is a tool. It can be used for good or bad.
Yeah.
And we talk about people who stories are shared, people pick up on it, find it relatable. I'm guessing that you're not finding that with 10, 12, 14-year-olds. You're talking more about those that are older.
Right.
And one of the things we know developmentally, and in fact, we've talked with Mary and Lance about this too, is that developmentally, kids are great consumers of information. They're terrible interpreters of information. In other words, they're not very good at analyzing and critiquing what it is that they're taking in. Their brains just aren't developed to that point yet. And so one of the things that have to be, I'm right on board with you about the sharing of stories and vulnerability, relatability. My struggle is in watching young teenagers who aren't really doing that or capable of that yet.
Right. And that's a great point. I know we have family members who have young children and they consume social media, and they don't, like when they get around our daughter, we say like, no TikTok. We don't expose our kid to it. Yeah. We have a church account for TikTok because we're trying to figure out how to infiltrate that whole system. But when you have a young kid navigating that on their own, it's dangerous because of what lurks around the corner for them. And we're one church on an app that has millions and millions of people.
Right.
Like we can only reach so much.
Yep.
And our church content isn't tailored towards a young kid.
Right.
And so that's what we've talked about before as well, is like the influence. So we're stewards of our environment and we're to be the influence, yet sadly, sometimes we allow influences in front of our kids' very eyes whether that's just movies, whether that's the music we listen to, whatever it is.
Yeah.
We allow that influence to happen right in front of us even, and we don't understand the effect it would have on them later in life.
Well, and to be transparent, my brother-in-law was telling us about how he feels like he can't have a conversation with his kids sometimes because something's just missing there. And instead they'd rather be staring at their screen, right, on their phone and on, a video game or whatever they may be doing. And so, and this isn't like, again, to say he's doing it wrong or anything like that, but we have to be responsible as parents to say, okay, then, you see that and you have to say no more. That's enough, because that's, again, our jobs.
Well, it makes me laugh because if I think of, when you read in scripture what it's telling parents to do, kids didn't have these barriers. It was
right.
like, how to make them work less or something.
Yeah.
It wasn't a barrier. How to respect your father and mother, honor your father and mother was different. That's like a large command. And we're also, we have a great commission as well. And so we are going to have unique barriers. Maybe you're a home that is, battery-free toys, no TV, nothing, but you send your kids to public school, right. So there's still going to be an influence around them that's not you. And mind you, public school is an 8-hour day.
Right.
And so you really have that time to really be the model for your kids because they're going to see it from their peers as well. So,
yeah. Which speaks to the importance of modeling from the time they're born as they're little, when you have the most influence, because your influence will get less as they get older. One of the things that we've talked about with families and churches, one of the best things parents can do as their kids get older and are hitting adolescence is find ways to get them or keep them connected to other kids who care about the Lord. Because that in adolescence, peer group takes on such a significant place with regard to how I think and what I do and the way that I look. And so if peer group's really important, one of the best things you can do is get them connected, whether that be youth group at church or one of the things we did, which was we always found interesting, and it was really helpful. When our kids were growing up and when they hit adolescence, we decided that we were going to make our house a place that was kind of the place to be for them and their peer group. I mean, so we had a hot tub, we bought a pool table, we had a movie room. I mean, we did
incentive
stuff
for all the good things. Yeah.
made that. So they were there at our house most every weekend. And, we got a chance to interact with them, talk with them, hear what they were thinking about, and be able to share some things with them. And then, we weren't hanging out with them all the time when they were there, but we knew where they were and we knew what they were doing.
Right.
And that as we talk to our kids now who are older, they are trying to do the same thing with their kids, is how do we make our house a place where our kids can hang out with other good kids or kids who follow the Lord.
And where they want to be. You know?
And that's like the story of Mitch Vizzo we were talking about before this with you guys. I have a great friend, Mitch, and in middle school, he invited me to everything. And we were always, Roger's dad was always around us. And I was kind of that lost kid that he never stopped inviting anywhere. And he was never ashamed to be around me. And that's like the same model we've talked about before is like, I want our kids to go reach their lost friends and to have a controlled environment where we know what's being taught, what's being talked about, what's being conducted. But what we have to remember is that it's up to us to model, like, this is the environment that we're going to take and sacrifice our own home for the greater good of you getting your friends here too. Yep. And so that's we've said this before, and sorry if our viewers hear this repetitively. But when we bought a house, there was a blueprint that we found in the house, and it was called the Gateway. And the Gateway house was a big thing that we've kind of stuck with, was like, we want it to be a gateway for people in their relationships. And we wanted it to be a hosting and an entertaining home. And it's, still in the works of the remodel, but we have hosted and entertained our small groups. And it's just awesome to watch our kids interact in that environment and know that we have a place that we can bring people in. And
it's always open.
Yeah.
no
to
matter what.
anyone.
It's always open.
It doesn't, it's not just for our church small groups. It's not
Right.
just, it's for everyone. And as our kids grow up, I'm so excited to see what, God does in the future with our kids' friends, families, and how that all develops as well. Because if we want to help our kids, part of the way we can help is to reach their friends' parents too.
Yes.
And to help
And it
their home life
extends
as
that
well.
way. Yeah.
So, all right. Well, Steve and Twyla, we're so thankful to have this
Yes.
time with you guys today and to pick your brains, and thankful for your wisdom. So thank you for being here with us.
It was a pleasure. It was great to get to meet you guys and talk with you, and God's best to you as you continue to work with families and people and try to help them discover what it's like to walk with Christ.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us,
Appreciate
guys.
it.
Thank you guys for joining us on today's episode with Steve and Twyla Lee. For more information and resources, visit our Life Church Huntington app. Go under Resources, Finding the Family, and there you'll find all additional information. We look forward to seeing you guys next week.